fabled heat, where magic meets desire. Subscribe to ignite the fantasy.
The scent of Don Oberon was distinct: sulfur, expensive cigar smoke, and the cloying sweetness of rotting orchids. He didn't materialize in a puff of glitter like the godmothers in the stories. He simply stepped out of the shadows in the corner of my dressing room, the darkness clinging to his pinstriped suit like a second skin. "Princess Elara," he rasped, his voice sounding like dry leaves skittering over pavement. He adjusted his silk tie, his eyes solid black, no iris or sclera, fixing on me with an unnerving stillness. Big day, the biggest. I turned from the vanity, my fingers gripping the cool mahogany until my knuckles were white. My corset was laced tight enough to snap a rib, each breath a shallow, bruising effort. "Godfather, I didn't think you'd come." "The family doesn't miss a wedding, Bellissima." Oberon moved closer, his movements fluid, predatory. He was Fae of the High Court, but he had long ago traded the ancient forests for the criminal underground, especially when our favorite niece is being shipped off to the Iron Kingdom to marry a butcher. A butcher was a generous term. The tales spun about Prince Kaelen involved scorched villages and rivers running red. He was the monster parents used to frighten their children, and now he was to be my husband. I was the blood price for peace. "I do what I must for the kingdom," I said, my voice a trembling whisper that betrayed my carefully constructed composure. Oberon tutted, reaching out with a long, manicured finger to tilt my chin up. "Noble, stupid, but noble. But you know the rules, Elara. We don't let our own go into the lion's den without teeth." He snapped his fingers. From the shadows beneath my chaise lounge, two goblins in miniature tuxedos scuttled out, dragging a long, velvet case. They opened it to reveal not a glass slipper, but a stiletto dagger. The handle was encrusted with black diamonds, the blade forged from weeping glass, unbreakable and sharp enough to cut a soul. "For the garter," Oberon winked, "just in case the prince gets. Grabby before you're ready, and remember, the boys are always watching. You see a shadow move, that's Vinny. You hear the wind whisper, that's Sal. You are never alone." A sharp knock at the door startled me. "Your Highness, it is time." I strapped the dagger to my thigh, the cold glass biting against my skin, a secret promise hidden beneath layers of tulle and silk. "Thank you, Godfather." "Don't thank me yet, just remember who loves you." He vanished into the gloom just as the door opened. The walk down the aisle of the grand cathedral felt like a march to the gallows. Every step echoed in the cavernous space. The air, thick with incense and the weight of 1,000 scrutinizing eyes, felt heavy in my lungs. At the altar stood Kaelen. He was larger than the rumors suggested, broad-shouldered, clad in black ceremonial armor, a fur cloak draped over him like the pelt of a beast he'd slaughtered. His dark hair fell into eyes the color of stormy seas. He looked at me not with desire, but with a cold, calculating assessment, as if valuing livestock. When I reached him, the priest droned on about duty. Kaelen took my hand. His palm was a map of battles and brutality, rough against my own. His grip was an iron manacle, yet a current of searing, unexpected heat shot up my arm, a jolt so powerful it made my teeth ache. "You're trembling," Kaelen murmured, his voice a low rumble meant only for me. "Fear, princess." "Anticipation," I lied, meeting his gaze. He smirked, a dangerous quirk of his lips. "We shall see." The priest bound our hands. "I now pronounce you man and wife. You may seal the union." Kaelen leaned in, his other hand slid to the back of my neck, fingers tangling in my hair, his thumb pressing into my pulse point as if to measure my fear. He claimed my mouth with a bruising intensity, a kiss that tasted of spiced wine and dominance. It wasn't gentle, it was a conquest, a warning. My body, the traitor, betrayed me completely. Instead of recoiling, it softened against his unyielding armor, a molten spark of illicit desire igniting deep in my stomach. As he pulled back, breathless, I saw his eyes widen slightly, looking over my shoulder. I didn't turn, but I felt it. The temperature in the cathedral dropped. The shadows in the rafters elongated, stretching down like claws. Kaelen gripped my arm, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "Elara, why does your shadow have eyes?" The carriage ride to the Iron Kingdom was an exercise in sustained torture. The wheels groaned over the uneven road, a constant reminder of our passage from the vibrant lands of my home to the stark, unforgiving territory of the Iron Kingdom. Outside, the landscape bled of color, the rolling green hills giving way to jagged, gray peaks that clawed at an overcast sky. Kaelen sat opposite me, his long legs stretched out, invading my space. He had removed his ceremonial armor, leaving him in a white linen shirt unbuttoned at the collar. It revealed the tanned expanse of his throat and the hint of an intricate tattoo spiraling down his chest. "You haven't answered my question," Kaelen said, his voice a low baritone that cut through the silence. He swirled amber whiskey in a glass. "At the wedding, the darkness, it moved." "It's a long journey, husband. Perhaps the incense of the cathedral muddled your senses," I said, smoothing my skirts. "I don't hallucinate, Elara, and I don't like surprises." He leaned forward, the scent of leather, whiskey, and musk invading my senses, making the small space feel even more claustrophobic. "I was told you were a sheltered princess, a dove to be kept in a cage, but doves don't look at wolves the way you look at me." "And how do I look at you?" I asked, my pulse quickening. "Like you're deciding where to bury the body." I suppressed a smile. "Maybe I am." The world suddenly became a maelstrom of splintering wood and shattering glass. A scream tore from the driver, a sound abruptly choked off by a wet, final thud. The carriage slammed onto its side, pitching me through the air. I braced for impact but landed hard against Kalen's chest. His arms were a steel cage, locking around me instantly, his body absorbing the brutal skid across the rocky ground. For a moment there was only the sound of my own ragged breath in the sudden, ringing silence. "Stay here," Kaelen commanded, drawing a heavy broadsword from beneath the seat. "No," I scrambled up, reaching for the slit in my dress where the glass dagger waited. Kaelen kicked the door open and dragged me out into the cold, driving rain. We were in a narrow mountain pass. Surrounding us were a dozen men in ragged cloaks, mercenaries, assassins. "Iron Prince," one shouted, "your head is worth a kingdom today." Kaelen shoved me behind him. "My brother sent you, didn't he? Tell that coward to come himself." They charged. Kaelen was a whirlwind of focused violence. His broadsword was not an elegant weapon, it was an extension of his own brutal strength, cleaving through leather and bone with terrifying efficiency. Rain and blood mingled in the air. He moved with a dancer's deadly grace, a stark contrast to the savage outcomes of his blows, but there were too many. One assassin broke from the pack, lunging for me. I raised my dagger, but I didn't need to strike. A vine, thick as a python and covered in black thorns, erupted from the mud. It wrapped around the assassin's ankle, whipping him into the air with a bone-crunching snap. Kaelen froze for a microsecond, watching the man disappear into the brush. What in the hells? Another assassin moved to strike Kalen's blind side. From the cliff face, a figure materialized, a sprite in a fedora and suspenders, holding a Tommy gun that fired bolts of green plasma. Rat-a-tat-tat. The assassin disintegrated into ash. "Courtesy of Don Oberon," the sprite squeaked, tipping his hat to me before vanishing. The remaining assassins, realizing they were fighting not just a prince but the supernatural Mafia, fled into the night. Kaelen spun toward me, his chest heaving. He advanced on me, backing me against the cold, wet wood of the carriage. He pinned my wrists in one hand above my head, his body pressing flush against mine, a wall of heat and muscle that stole my breath. His eyes were wild, a tempest of fury, suspicion, and an arousal that mirrored my own. I could feel the hard ridge of his desire pressing against my hip, an undeniable truth in the midst of chaos and magic. "Who are you, Elara?" he growled, his face inches from mine. "And what have you brought into my kingdom?" I looked up at him, the rain plastering my hair to my face, and let a small, dangerous smile touch my lips. "I brought my dowry," I whispered. "I hope you have good insurance." We had to abandon the carriage. Kalen's horse was the only one that survived the ambush, so we rode double, my thighs aching from straddling the beast, my back pressed against Kalen's chest. His arm was a steel band around my waist, keeping me steady. We arrived at a hunting lodge on the border of his lands just as the sun began to set. It was a rustic, single-room structure, dusty from disuse. Kaelen kicked the door shut and immediately began stripping off his wet shirt. I turned away, trying to ignore the play of muscles across his back, the latticework of scars that told the history of his violent life. "There's only one bed," he stated flatly. "Of course there is," I muttered. The universe, or perhaps Oberon, had a sense of humor. I struggled with the laces of my gown. The water had made the knots impossible. I'm stuck. Kaelen walked over. I felt his heat before his touch. His fingers brushed my spine, sending shivers that had nothing to do with the cold. He worked the laces with surprising patience. "You have powerful friends," he said quietly. "Fae, the Unseelie Court. Something like that. They call themselves the Organization. And what did you pay for their protection?" "My father paid a debt long ago. Now I'm considered family." The dress pooled at my feet. I stood in my thin chemise, shivering. Kaelen turned me around. His gaze dropped to my lips, then lower, taking in the curve of my breasts beneath the damp linen. The air in the cabin grew stiflingly hot. "I expected to hate you," Kaelen admitted, his voice rough. "I expected a spy, a weakness. And no." He reached out, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw. "Now I think you are the most dangerous thing I've ever encountered." He kissed me then, and it wasn't like the performance at the cathedral. This was raw hunger. I tangled my fingers in his wet hair, pulling him closer. He lifted me effortlessly, walking us backward until my legs hit the mattress. We fell onto the furs, a tangle of limbs and desperate need. His skin was fire against mine. I wanted him. I realized with a shock that I had wanted him since he first looked at me with that dark, brooding scowl. But just as his hand slid up my thigh, a sharp, rhythmic tapping echoed from the window. "Tab, tab, tab." Kaelen groaned, pulling back, his forehead resting against mine. "Tell me that isn't one of your relatives." I looked over his shoulder. Perched on the windowsill was a crow with a golden ring in its beak. It tapped again, insistent. "It's a messenger," I said, breathless. Kaelen cursed and moved off me, though he kept a possessive hand on my ankle. I went to the window and opened it. The crow dropped the ring into my palm and croaked, "The soup is cold." Repeat, "The soup is cold." My blood turned to ice. It was code. "What is it?" Kaelen asked, sensing my shift in mood. He was already reaching for his sword. "It means treason," I said, turning to him. "It means we aren't safe here. The ambush wasn't just your brother. Someone inside your inner circle opened the gates." Kaelen's face hardened into a mask of fury. "Who?" "I don't know," I said, gripping the ring. It bore the crest of his own personal guard. "But they're coming tonight." Kaelen looked at the door, then back at me. "You need to leave. Take the horse. I'll hold them off." "No. Elara, don't be stubborn. If they find you." "If they find me, they'll regret it," I snapped. I walked back to him, placing my hand on his chest, right over his heart. "I'm not running, Kaelen. We're married. That means your enemies are my enemies, and my family. They handle enemies very effectively." He looked at me, conflict warring in his eyes. Finally, he covered my hand with his. "If we survive this night, Elara, I promise you, I will give you everything." "Let's survive first," I said. "Do you trust me?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." "Good." I closed my eyes and whispered the words Oberon had taught me, the words that summoned the heavy hitters. Outside, the wind began to howl, and the shadows of the trees detached themselves from the ground, standing tall and straightening their ties. The lodge was surrounded. I could hear the crunch of boots on gravel, the unsheathing of steel. There were at least 30 of them this time. Kaelen stood by the door, broadsword in hand, looking like a god of war. I stood in the center of the room, my glass dagger in hand, waiting. The door burst open. Men in the livery of the Iron Guard poured in. The captain, a man Kaelen had called a friend, sneered. "Sorry, Prince, the payout was just too high." Kaelen didn't waste words. He launched himself into the fray. The clash of steel was deafening. He was magnificent, a blur of lethal motion, but they were overwhelming him. "No!" I screamed. The windows shattered inward. They didn't come in like heroes. They came in like a nightmare. Pixies with brass knuckles, trolls in tailored suits wielding lead pipes, and banshees wailing a discordant symphony that made the traitor guards drop their weapons to clutch their bleeding ears. In the center of it all, strolling through the chaos as if he were walking through a garden, was Don Oberon. "Evening," Oberon drawled. He pointed a finger at the traitorous captain. You're rude. We don't like rude." Oberon snapped his fingers. The shadows beneath the captain surged up, wrapping around him like a cocoon, silencing his screams as he was dragged down into the floorboards, disappearing into the void. The remaining guards panicked. They turned to run, but the boys were everywhere. It was a massacre, swift and professional. Within minutes, the room was silent, save for the heavy breathing of Kaelen and the straightening of lapels by the goblins. Kaelen lowered his sword, looking around the room in disbelief. He looked at Oberon, then at me. Oberon walked up to Kaelen, looking up at the towering prince. He dusted an imaginary speck of lint off Kaelen's bloodied armor. "You got guts, kid," Oberon said, his voice like gravel. "I like that. You treat her right, we won't have problems. You treat her wrong." He let the sentence hang, heavy with the threat of eternal torment. Capus. Kaelen sheathed his sword, his eyes finding mine. Capus. "Good." Oberon turned to me. "The car's waiting, or well, the carriage. Vinny fixed the wheel. We'll escort you the rest of the way to the capital. We need to have a little talk with your brother-in-law." The fairy mob melted away as quickly as they had arrived, dragging the bodies with them to dispose of in the Fae wilds. We were alone again. Kaelen walked to me, dropping his forehead against mine. He was shaking, the adrenaline crash hitting him. "You summoned the Fae court." "I called my godfather," I corrected. "You are terrifying," he whispered, a smile finally breaking through his stoicism. "And you are mine." "And you are mine," I replied. He kissed me, and this time there were no interruptions. He lifted me up, carrying me back to the bed. The danger had passed, leaving only the burning connection between us. "The contract said this was a political alliance," Kaelen murmured against my throat, his hands roaming over my body with possessive reverence. "Contracts can be amended," I gasped as he laid me down. "Then let's amend it," he growled, "to a love match." As the night deepened, protected by the shadows that watched from the trees, the Prince of Iron and the Princess of the Mob sealed their own pact, one of sweat, skin, and soul. My godfather might run the underworld, but Kaelen was learning to rule my heart, and with the mob behind us, the world didn't stand a chance.